Not it's back. Let's see. So I am curious. Does anybody here live in the county but not in the city? Jay, so why are we here? Because our mayor and Eugene. That's going to be one of our questions. And thank you all for coming out to this session. How many here has lived in the neighborhood for, under 5 years? Okay, about five, good. And about over 10 years. Yeah, there's a lot of folks that are, old timers. We got to get new blood in this neighborhood. And who here gets the e-news monthly in their inbox? Yay! Okay. And do you know the person you're sitting next to? What their name is? Yes. Yes. Okay. Where they live? You know their mother's maiden name? Okay. So our agenda tonight is what we usually do. So we have a board report and announcements to the community, and then we have our guests. And Lindsay, our city council rep, has
damaged her ear.
Yeah. So she's not able to come tonight. So that means we're going to put Kaarin on the spot for a really long time. But we can always adjourn early. And the announcements. The board report is that we've been very busy working on plans for this 25-26 fiscal year, and we're almost ready to finalize and send it to the city for budget approval and everything. So that's a big relief. I don't know if they reported before, but we did have a mini retreat to onboard our new board members last month. And that involved going over all of our documents and our work agreements and things like that. And we've been, Beth has been going to the Neighborhood Leaders Council meeting, and she has an history report out about that.
Right, yeah, the Neighborhood Leaders Council, which I'm just really learning about. I'm the voting member on that council now. John was there for many, many years. And it's a time for all of the neighborhood organizations in Eugene to get together. There are 2 co-chairs of the Neighborhood Organization Leadership Council. And one of the, I was sharing with Kaarin a few minutes ago, one of the advantages of that group is the ability to share ideas about what individual neighborhood groups are doing, what's working, and to ask questions and say, I'm having a problem. Do some of you have some ideas about how I might do it? I think we're starting to work together. It fell apart, as I understand it, when I wasn't there over COVID. And now it's starting to come back together with the 2 co-chairs are very energetic and very concerned about the conversations we can have with each other. I actually learned that Kaarin was interested in coming to neighborhood organization meetings because of the minutes from that organization. Otherwise, I don't think I would have invited her. And so that's an advantage, is to find out what is available for neighborhood organizations to do. We did compose that one of the co-chairs sent a letter to the city budget committee before their decision on the budget. And I think it was powerful in terms of talking about the in-kind services that people in neighborhood organizations actually provide to the city at no cost to the city. And the cost, they help to provide us with money for printing and some other activities, but the cost to the city is minimal compared to the services that we can provide to the city. And Jim Cena, together with a couple of other people from the Neighborhood Leaders Council, put that letter together. And it just so happens that the chair of the city budget committee is a part of the Neighborhood Leaders Council. And so, of course, when he's on the budget committee, he's not wearing that hat, but he was able to give some insights into what the city had been talking about. So it's just been a wonderful opportunity, I think, for neighborhood leaders to get together, in part to their boards and to the rest of the people in the neighborhood. Some of the activities, some of the things that are happening around town, how we can work together to enhance and strengthen neighborhood organizations. Thank you.
The River Celebration is a happening thing, and this will be our third year. And they have bi-weekly team meetings to organize it. It's really a fun volunteer activity for between now and September. If you want a short-term project to help put that together, it's a lot of fun. Good people working on it. And
You want to get something?
yeah.
Board's on the board.
Hi, everybody. A couple things. The River Road Santa Clara Volunteer Library on Open Lane is having an open house on Sunday, June 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Looks like lots of great stuff, free kids zone, book sale, library tours, meet authors, various other things. So there's a little poster in the e-newsletter that we sent out that gives you this information again. We'd love to see you there. RRCO will be there, as well as the Santa Clara community organization. I wanted to also just give you a quick update on local access roads. How many of you are familiar with local access roads? Okay, so good number. These are basically almost a random subset of roads in our neighborhood that the county has never taken into the road system, even though they look just like county maintained roads. And we've been pressuring the county commissioners to take these on. We have not had success at this point. We need your involvement, so see me if you can help us. But we also need to start working with the city around the idea of road annexation, because commissioners want the city to solve this problem. And you know, how can we possibly get some leverage over the county to maintain them in the meantime? So we'll kind of work on both aspects. So thank you.
Other not
Oh, yep, I'm gonna read my notes if that's okay, just a little bit. This is an update on the, Eugene Fuels proposal.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Adrian. Yes, I have just been trying to support a little bit of the knowledge sharing, in our group with the, Bethel Train Operator Association.
Adrian, can I ask you to stand?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is just an update on the, Eugene Clean Fuels LLC proposal for the Regional Distribution Center. Show of hands, who was familiar with this issue when it was happening late last year? Awesome, excellent. So as you all know, we worked together with a few of the other neighborhood associations and a few organizations in town who weren't very happy with that proposal, and the Eugene City Planning Commission denied the permit for its where it's zoned at that point. Sorry, there's some details here. But the same company, Eugene Clean, has now applied for a new unit, a bulk plant, about 1.5 miles away from the original proposal. So it's now kind of resurfaced with a somewhat smaller footprint, but similar issues. And it's unexpected that a further appeal will be successful. And so we met with the active Bethel Neighborhood Association and the Trans-Long Association this past May 15th to discuss the issue with Beyond Conference, kind of hosting a forum on it. And a land use supervisor in the city of Eugene spoke to the public health standards, which are currently being proposed underway. And so the kind of call to action here is those are going to be the results of a survey with regard to those standards discussed and introduced to the city council this upcoming meeting. And the agreement is for everyone to attend in support of those public health standards. The intention of those standards is to support better integration between a variety of regulatory agencies, Department of Environmental Quality, Regional Air Protection Agency, wastewater and storm water management services, nuisance codes, Eugene Springfield Fire Marshal's Office, and of course our land use code. so that those different vehicles of enforcement can better work together. That's how Beyond Toxics would like to see, is trying to have this issue addressed. So that's the update. Oh, that's okay.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question? So you said a mile and a half away, what's the approximate location of the proposed site?
It's 1860 Empire Road. It's north. I think it's that.
Going out the highway 99. Before you.
Jim.
I just wanted to share just in a moment, a little brief experience of clarity that I had a couple of months ago. I get these now and then. And it is that the whole idea of emergency preparedness, which we're all acquainted with, which is a good thing. But if you take emergency preparedness to a little bit of a further assessment, it starts to merge with permaculture and all these kinds of ideas that everybody is seeing on these posters that I have. And if you don't, then you should pick up one of these posters because they're free. But it's suburban permaculture transforming our neighborhoods, producing more where we live, and community building. So that's kind of, and I'm doing a series of Zoom presentations and site tours around Eugene. We just had one at Duma a couple of days ago to see what these kinds of ideas look like. Building community, reducing ecological footprints, permaculture. So the information I have on my website on this poster, and you can see the schedule for these permaculture site tours and also the Zoom presentations. And we also had an awesome work party with the city in the Filbert Grove about a week ago. And if you're acquainted with that, there was a row of filbert trees at the north end that had always been really gnarly, with a bunch of kids from the Rachel Carson School really did a lot of good work, and we made some major progress. The place needs to be mowed, but it'll happen sooner or later. But it looks really different with that row of filbert trees, looking kind of more tidy now. So that's the news for the filbert Grove.
I want to.
Welcome to have posters.
Thank you. I want to mention that we have several members of the board of the River Road Recreation and Parks, blah, 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 what's it called? Park and Rec. And that Beth and I went to their board meeting, and it was really productive, talking about ways that as the two kind of important institutions of the neighborhood can collaborate to support each other, particularly when there's, you know, financial stressors and there's other kinds of stressors and we all have to go work out. We're really looking forward to building that relationship more. Thank you for coming every time.
Can I ask Linda a really quick question? Are you going to give a report on what we're doing, or can I?
Sorry,
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to speak up. Hi, I'm CJ.
Linda.
I'm part of a very small group of folks who are working, I'll back up a second. So, livable communities and a leadership academy was held a while back. And Linda and I were both members of the AARP sponsored livable communities, age-friendly communities, climate-friendly communities, etc. And after we were done with all of our classes, they said, you need a project. And Linda said, oh, great, I have a project for us. So a small group of us are starting a very small, what's it called? Groundswell. Thank you, that word. Our project is to convince Lane County District to reinstate the 55 Park Avenue bus route so that it will stop at the River Road Park, so everybody in the neighborhood could go over there and enjoy nature. So you'll hear more about us in the near future. Is that good enough, dear? Thanks.
Community activism. Thank you. It's exciting. Okay, anybody online have an announcement you want to make? Everybody's sick. Not everybody, but thank you for staying home.
Terry Morton is our secretary to the board.
And Michelle is the treasurer.
Is
So-
Michelle here? Oh,
Yes,
there's
she's there.
Michelle.
Okay. Are you waving or raise your hand? Okay, so finally the room has filled up. We must be ready to go.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce our honorable, yeah, okay.
I just have an announcement, but I don't know if there's time for it.
Is there one, I mean,
No, I can make it quick. Just see me after the meeting if you would be possibly interested in signing a petition for Osara. It's to get an amendment to the Oregon Constitution that we all have a right to a livable environment, all Oregonians. And we're trying to get it on the ballot for fall. And we're trying to get 2,000 signatures by a couple days from now. So anyway,
great,
doing pretty well.
thank you, Sandy. Okay, so the honorable Kaarin Knudson.
All we ever say is, but I'm gonna pass this around. If you've got any questions for Karen as she's speaking, go ahead and write them down. Jan will collect them. And so she's going to speak for 20 minutes or so.
I will speak that one.
Talk a little bit about what's happening in the city of Eugene and anything that she wants to share with us about River Road. So I'll just pass those around. Thank you, Karen, so much.
for them, just in case, even if you don't have a question, you may develop a question. Really, and that's what I've been doing already. I've filled one of these. I'm a visual learner, so I always write things down. It's in my memory. If I write it down, I can remember it for a long time.
You'll need to speak up for the people in back.
And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. I am on the edge of hamstring my vocal cords, and I've been advised not to use my louder voice this week if I can. So can you all still hear me if I'm speaking at this volume? Can you all hear me on Zoom? Great. I'm going to try to stay here. See if I can be successful in that.
You can go closer to the mic too.
There, here, okay. Can you all hear me a little better now if I stand closer? Okay, great. The owl is with us. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation and for following up on the request that I made at the Neighborhood Leadership Council's annual meeting. Gosh, it's been probably almost a month, which I can't even believe since that event because there's been so much happening. But all of our neighborhood associations, we have 23 across the city of Eugene. A lot of them have a lot of engagement through the summer months. People are out and about, there are barbecues and bars, or get-togethers, or potlucks, or gatherings, or block parties. And I just made a sort of blanket overture to please reach out to the mayor's office. I'm very easy to find the City of Eugene website. If there's an event that you're planning in community this summer, and if it can work with my schedule, I'm going to try to get around to the city, especially to the neighborhood associations that I haven't had a chance yet to spend time with. I was just trying, as mayor, I was trying to think of the last time that I was with River Road, and I believe it was the joint River Road Santa Clara meeting that you all had several months ago, would have been last summer, fall, I believe, maybe even in the late spring, specifically focused on public safety. And quite a lot has happened at that point in time. I had presentations from the county sheriff, the Hoots, Lynn County mobile crisis. Now here we are in that future where Lynn County mobile crisis has been stood up. And that was my last opportunity at one of your meetings to listen to a conversation and really hear. And I was just there out of curiosity at the time. I was not yet officially your mayor. But I just wanted to hear the kind of conversation that you all were having and the kind of concerns that were being raised specifically around that issue, because I am very aware, and I think your entire city council, your city administrative leadership are all aware of the fact that there are particular infrastructure challenges, particular circumstances with public space that River Road and Highway 99 contend with that are unique within the city and are a great expression of the fact that all of the neighborhoods across Eugene face different circumstances, have a different built environment, and also have different sets of needs in different areas where we as a city need to focus attention. So that was our last opportunity to connect, just to spend a little bit of time together. I do want to emphasize again, because I spoke with Councilor Leach earlier today while she was home attempting to rest. She has a ruptured eardrum. And so she has been also advised to lay low. She did not know that before traveling just in the last handful of days, and is in quite a lot of pain and really regrets the opportunity to not be here together. But we did have a chance to talk a little bit about some of the things that she has been in touch with you all about. And it's also, I think, previously heard a place of emphasis and priorities for the neighborhood. So very quickly, before that meeting with Councilor Leach, I went back to my email and checked on Beth's invitation and the ask for this evening. And really the top line to that ask, and I guess what I will focus on before opening just to a general discussion and Q&A, is kind of what's been happening and what has this first now not quite 5 months as your mayor been occupied with. What has been the focus of time and effort and energy during this first 5 months, not first 100 days, but first almost 5 months as you're there. And I will say, and then no surprise to you, because even some of the foreshadowing from introductory comments, that coming to a conclusion and to stable footing with our city budget conversation has really been a primary area of focus and effort for me in this first several months. And that the context for that I will offer is that a couple of things. One, this is our first biennial budget. I keep trying to share that in the community because there is a bit about this process that has felt very unusual, but moving forward, having a 2-year budget, a biennial budget for our community should allow for us to have an entire calendar year to be working on building that budget, and then a year of the typical budget process. There are administrative efficiencies in that structure, but there are also real opportunities for us as a community, and for me as your mayor, absolutely committed to this, doing additional work to reach out to the public and develop a plan for just general information sessions all around our city, so that more people have a sort of introductory level of information about our budgeting process and what goes into that process every couple of years before we get down to the specifics of program funding and infrastructure. I offer that because in these conversations I've had over the past several months, it feels like a gap for us as a community, and a place where with some concerted effort we can actually close the gap in our shared understanding and have a clearer shared understanding of the problems we're trying to solve, and also the strategies or the solutions that might be appropriate to those problems. I say that because over this past several months, where we've been very focused on an $11.5 million gap in our general fund of our budget, and many times in that conversation, I've ended up very quickly in conversation with a community group or a person that has been speaking to, say, our streets bond funding, or the parks levy funding, or the library levy funding. And all of those are a part of the constellation of inputs and funding that we have to meet our city's investment goals, our community's priorities around how it is that we are allocating and organizing resources. But those areas of funding are not the same as the general fund. And I offer them because in these last several months, people have said things to me like, well, why can't we just, not move forward with that street repaving project or with that bicycle lane improvement if we have a budget gap? So let's just use that money to close that budget gap in the general fund. And that's not the way that the budget works. Those dollars that we have set out through an agreement with voters in a streets bond to say, voters, we are going to fund these projects with this money. Would you like us to do this? So yes, if the answer is yes, but no, if the answer is no. When we make those agreements with the public for all of our reserved revenue funds, that means that that money goes to those things. And there's no kind of internal moving around of dollars from those reserved funds into our general fund needs. And I wanted to say just a little bit about that, because that's been an area of, I just feel like we haven't spent enough time explaining some of those basics about the structure of our budget and why it is that we face the challenges that we face in terms of aligning revenue and expenses. I also try to repeat every time I talk about the budget that we are required to balance our budget. There's no version where the city says, it's a good year this year, let's sock away an extra amount of money in a fund here that we know we're going to need to use for that program 2 years from now. City budgets can't do that. We have a reserve for revenue shortfall, which is really the emergency fund, in a true sense of an emergency fund, for those of you familiar with that concept. And that's the funding that we use to do things like respond to a global pandemic, and be able to stand up resources in an emergency response. But that's reserves. That's not sort of, we like to fund this program in the future, so let's set that there. And that was another area that I heard a lot of feedback at different points in this process from people around, like, why can't the city just save money in good times and then have more money in bad times? And that's not really the way that agreements with taxpayers works. That's not the way that your local government is working. We're trying very hard to be good stewards of resources, year in and year out in that process. So the good news in that budget conversation, as Beth alluded to, is that we have landed this decision plane, so to speak. And where we've landed is a decision that responds to the funding needs for so many of the core community services that we heard, really direct feedback from the community about needing to fund. And then we're able to actively strategize with city staff and with council and partners about how there might be a path forward to fund those core services and close that revenue gap. We as a city still will be making with that 11.5 initial budget target that we were seeking to close in terms of the gap in the budget. It was 11.5 million. There is in total now about 5.8 million of that has been covered, that now covers services for ongoing at 4.7 and 1.1 million for 1 million. And then the budget will also be cut by that other portion. So it's not an outcome where there's no implications to our city's capacity to meet community needs, but it is an outcome where we are preserving core community services and the services like access to Eugene Public Library, animal welfare services, access to our ongoing future planning for alternative response in our community, which will be through partnership as Lane County Mobile Crisis continues, support for community center childcare funding for operation of things like the Amazon pool, and a long list of other priorities, including our neighborhood programs through the Office of Equity and Community Engagement. That was one of the many line items that had been identified for possible significant reduction or elimination in trying to close this first 11.5 million and $8 million gap in funding. So the good news is that those services and those really core community services have funding beneath them. The also good news is that we will do this work every 2 years as a community. We will continue on, not just in our budgeting process, but in our community decisions around levies and bond investments to collectively engage with the question of how we would like to invest the resources we have locally and what needs we are prioritizing and trying to meet as a community. So I also offer that because sometimes when you say good news, we have an outcome, people think, great, we've done with that for a long time. And in the case of our city's budgeting work, we just come right back to it again, and we do this work again. It's the ongoing work of managing and setting policy priorities for a city. So I wanted you all to know that, and I hope to in the future have an update back to you, maybe this time next year, where we're talking about some of those outreach meetings that I described with our budget, where we can just provide more of an opportunity all around our city for people to understand the city's budget. I've heard a lot from people this last several weeks that some of the budget committee presentations have been incredibly helpful to just understanding the structure. And we want to share that information because we want the questions and the feedback and the advocacy to be as informed as possible to the challenges that the city is trying to address. So no surprise that process and joining that process as your new incoming mayor, joining a process that the point I became your mayor, our public process around that budget decision was well over a year and a half in process. A year and a half of training down the track at the point that I jumped on to the caboose, and then was trying to work with our council and our community to come to a resolution. And again, very pleased with the very hard work and difficult decision making, but the decision making that the council made to be able to bring us to a point of stability for funding those services. That has been a big piece. I will also say that throughout my mayoral campaign, I talked with people all around our community about the importance of safe public space in Eugene, the importance of the health of our local economy, and the way it is we're planning for an abundant and rich future in our community, and our housing crisis, and specifically our needs to continue to be innovative and productive in our work to meet a very wide range of housing needs, but also to plan effectively and implement outcomes that support our community into the future. So a couple of other things that important for you all to know. We have a few different community processes right now that are underway. Have you all had an update from the urban growth strategies staff? So I mention this because this is a part of how our community is implementing new state laws and new state rules related to planning for housing capacity. And a quick summary of how those have changed is that from 1972, when our comprehensive statewide planning system and thinking we should be organized when we think about development. We want Oregon to not look like Central Florida, where there's sort of no end to the urban fringe. It just continues with you along the highway as far as you drive. That's an example of a state where urban growth boundaries like ours are not in place, and the pattern of development. Strategies work locally is the city now needs to respond to much housing. And whereas that 50 years of previous planning was looking at what we need to plan for the next 20 years, we now are required by the state to look at population change, but also to look at our unhoused population, who is in our community currently unhoused, and also to look at our underproduction of our we're gonna get this amount of housing built in 20 years, so we're just gonna plan for that, make sure we have the land available. But in 2024, if we haven't hit those targets, that we we're addressing underproduction, population change, and our unhoused population in our housing planning. And we need to bring strategies and tools to the table that are going to help us to move all of those different types of needs. Different sets of needs within our community's profile require different types of strategies to respond to that. So that is a big shift. But I am a licensed architect in the state of Oregon, and in the last 10 years, I've spent a very significant amount of time on housing advocacy conversations within our community. I'm trying to help us steer towards a regulatory structure that will allow our housing to be more affordable, more equitable, more sociable, more diverse by nature. It takes cities a very long time to change. All cities around the world change over time, but they generally change slowly at the sort of city scale. And the work that we've done in this past couple of years will, in the future, incrementally over time, help us with those goals. So the ongoing staff work responding to the new statewide housing production targets will be a current event over these next few years of our city. And it's a big shift for us in thinking about how and where and what and which partners and how do we fund. The city does not build housing. We incentivize outcomes. We partner with nonprofit developers, for-profit or market rate housing developers. There are different tools that the city has to be able to try to bring costs out of that process, to bring more affordable projects into reality. But it's a dynamic experience, would probably be the best way to describe that, and really challenging. It's very hard to get something built. It's much easier to regulate an environment than it is to actually deliver an outcome in the building. But housing will continue to be a focus of my attention and my efforts for the whole time that I'm the mayor, because it's a huge need in our community, and it is an area where I think we can connect to the unique character and DNA of this place and actually model outcomes and solutions that are truly helpful to the community that is here, that reflects how we as a community see ourselves growing and changing and the needs that we're aware that we need to meet. And in the event that those great outcomes and models are useful to other places, then that is a terrific additional benefit for us. But I'm very focused on us being innovative in ways that serve the community. And that we are really, really focused on the experience of people who have lived their whole lives here, or trying to live their whole lives here, and want to feel like that there's a richness of opportunity and enough sort of buffer within their weekly and monthly experience that they can start to imagine what a really thriving life within this community, Southern Willamette Valley, within the city of Eugene, within our neighborhoods, and be supportive of that to the greatest extent that we can. I'm not going to say much more about other things that have been occupying time and energy. There are many, there are a lot. And I'm happy also to share more, but maybe if you all are willing, I would love to open the floor up for just questions and discussion, and also hear more from you about what you are really focused on right now, and try to connect that to the conversations that I know are coming at City Council.
So what we wanted to do was collect people's questions and organize it so that they could be topic clustered.
Okay.
But that'll take a moment. So in the interim, and would you like to pass the water?
I was going to say the same thing. I could definitely do this. That was probably the application. Thank you. I'm trying to try to.
Some of the questions are probably formulated as you have spoken and talked about certain topics. So I'm concerned that, they might be collated to the point where certain people's observations and questions might not be addressed in a matter because you only, summarize. So,
Always possible.
Yeah.
I would say, I approach the system as really good to take pictures of them, so that you can see all the questions, even if you don't necessarily get to answer all of the questions. I would love to be a better question here to me. My guess, though, talking literally, she did mention that, intersection at Chambers has been a real concern. I know some friends in the neighborhood that
my guess.
quite a circumstance, and I did reach out to our city engineer to make sure a little bit of information sharing. And then also local access roads.
Well,
That circumstance.
it involves more than just a post-it note on the lead up to the question that I would pose. For example, that we talked about, focusing on housing, population density. Seattle's going through the same thing now. They want to increase population density by at least 100%, possibly 100% by 2050, I believe it is. And I don't know if I see a lot of high rise, not high rise, but buildings in a smaller acreage. So it looks like you're working towards density. One, is that your purpose here? Are you working that into this community? Have you focused at all into creating the ADUs on various dwelling units, which allows the second family to live behind the main house? Is that something the department is working on? So, are you working to increase the density of this property or of this area in a nutshell? So you're nodding your head yes.
Barbara,
So-
I'm just affirming your question. I'm keeping tabs on
Okay.
them. But is there broad questions about
Okay,
planning for housing, which types belong where, what kinds
Yeah.
of policies do you want to support? What is available to everyone, everywhere, what is not available?
so that leads,
There's a unique condition in that.
if we are, as I see all these houses which are being built around here and proposals and stuff that shows up in our mail, and the LARs are responsible for their own roads. I can remember when this was a sleepy community because you connected this road to Blair. And when they built the Chambers connector, this area exploded. And that which was once a sleepy area has now become a main thoroughfare. And yet the people that live on LARs are now responsible for taking care of those roads. And
So
it's
you've got
just,
housing density, housing types, where do they belong, where do they maybe not belong?
yeah,
Also entitlements, also LARs. We put all the housing and transportation in one bucket, which as a person who's taught about housing and transportation for years, I love. You understand there's a connection.
Mhm.
And also, there's a lot of layers in every one of your questions. I can see where you're saying they would not have fit on a sticky note. But I'm betting that all of them are gonna come up in other questions, and if they do not, definitely have a chance.
Yeah.
I will say always that this is something that we miss sometimes working in the community.
Mhm.
There are consequences to every action.
Mhm.
Every action in the community. And I do not mean that as a negative or positive statement of judgment. I mean that there are always going to be reactions to actions. Right? And we, from a sort of fundamental laws way, but we also know that from working community, we know it down at the relational level and how it is that we work together. We also see it in the environment. The work to address all of our housing issues is going to need a whole variety of strategies. All of our needs are not the same. Livable communities, AARP came up, the livable communities leadership work came up. I presented as a educator to that group, to the Louise group. And one of the things that is important to acknowledge about that circumstance is that nationwide, we have some of our now oldest local residents who have been longtime homeowners, who also do not have a robust social safety net within the United States to rely on. And there are assumptions about housing value providing for stability at the household scale through the last quarter century of life. I'm summarizing a lot of information at once now. But for, I think it's about 75% of older Americans, an owned residence is the primary asset. There's not a retirement account or pension account that is more valuable or more expected to do that hard work of maintaining financial stability through whatever it is, anything else that comes from the goods. There's a reason why AARP and other advocacy organizations concerned about social relationship and social stability have been very engaged in advocacy around things like ADUs. And the simple explanation is that that is a strategy towards a very small increment of development and change that can accomplish a couple of goals at once. Three, actually. First goal is that there can be a unit of housing added into the environment. That's a good outcome in our community, to add a new unit of housing when there's land and space available and there's a designation that would say housing belongs here. Two would be that new unit of housing may be quite small, quite compact, quite energy efficient when built to even just basic current energy standards and structural standards, and also be accessible by design, very inexpensively in comparison to a retrofit of an existing home or circumstance or transformation. A 2.5-story home into something that is accessible for someone who's no longer interested in climbing up the stairs and doesn't have access to what they need on one floor level. So accessibility of housing unit was the second point. And the third point was financial stability. Because if you have, say, an asset at the front of the property that is a housing unit and a backyard, or a garage, attached accessory dwelling unit, attached ADU, or detached ADU. So detached being standing cottage, attached being a garage, retrofit into a housing unit. That is essentially an opportunity for that homeowner, Kaarin, she's 75, to be a landlord who can migrate from the front main housing unit into that smaller, more compact housing unit and rent the other unit on the side. And that cash flow is why you've seen such advocacy from organizations that care deeply about the stability of seniors, because they know that you can't buy groceries with an expensive house that you own that's acquired additional asset value over time.
So that proves my point. You're increasing the population density, and I do pay my taxes, as do other people, but when it comes to a LIR, basically you say, well, you gotta pay your taxes so you can use the roads and stuff like that. But when it comes to your road, you need to fork out extra money. And oh, by the way, we're gonna put more population into your property. And also in
Well,
addition to
you
that,
would be putting a population in your property, just to be clear.
well, I'm
The
just
city
saying,
would
people,
not do that.
people,
We would definitely not do that.
and they will, because it's a necessity in order for people to you know, maintain a quality of life that they want, continue to live there. So, and it all,
Strategies, right?
yeah,
Maintaining-
it also increases the amount of people who have to come into that location in order to, all I'm saying is the LIRs, we take the brunt of it. And many of these people who pay taxes, who use those roads, are not paying taxes on that road. We have to, so we're getting double jeopardy.
And this, my other request, that's an excellent point, and Councillor Leach also highlighted exactly what you shared when we discussed it earlier today. As your new mayor, I will say that the LARs are, what a curious designation. What a curious designation to move annex something from someone who doesn't officially own it. That's a curious designation of a thing.
If somebody hurts themselves on the road, I'm responsible for their injury.
Yeah, and so I would
Isn't that wild?
also just say that that conversation seems like we're headed to a conversation with also our county partners that I think would probably be the most productive way to gather information, but also prioritize, because the city will not be able to move in that process without some kind of partnership.
And I think that's an issue. You hit on it. It's the disjointed nature of our community where we've got city and county trying to work together, and you don't always work together.
And it's a really unique condition to have a configuration of jurisdictions like the one that you all live in. It is, you all know better than anyone, just how unusual it is.
One last thing.
So I've got another
I-
question. I've got another question. So what is the city doing, or what can it do holistically support improved transport? Wait a minute, that's not the one. The city of Eugene has lighting regulations. Are they enforced both for commercial and residential areas? Are you familiar with dark skies concepts? Can city become part of dark skies?
Who asked this question? Misty usually comes to council meetings and speaks to dark skies. I met Misty, and Misty has an op-ed in Eugene News this week. That's an issue that says local and local, local and local. There's an op-ed about dark sky groups in there. Yes, absolutely, we do. And something that is, I think, really positive is that all of the city's new installations of lighting, or the city controls the installation of lighting, things like our paths, those types of areas, those are all shielded, downlighting, minimizing light pollution, LED, photo responsive, also on timers, and in many cases, and the Fern Ridge path is a great example of this, also essentially individually self-sufficient at each light pole, which eliminates copper wiring from circumstance, which eliminates the invitation for vandalism, which is great. And the city, whenever we're able to implement and install, from all the information that I have, new lighting in public spaces, streets, parks, parking lots, path systems, we are working towards a very forward-thinking standard relative to light pollution. Challenge, as is always the case, it's a good analogy to accessibility in this case. The challenge is the existing condition surrounding. And then not every project is a new project, or a project that's even been implemented in the last 5 or 10 years. You might have lighting fixtures on a really beautiful historic house that are quite charming, that are giant glow fixtures out front at the end of the walkway. Those are exactly an example of the kinds of things that Misty explains to the city council when giving public testimony, that like this is sending at least half of that light directly up into the atmosphere. They're beautiful, but they're also not without consequence, right? So managing for the consequence of a well-illuminated public realm. And the city is very forward-thinking in that work. I don't know the mechanism, and I don't believe there is a mechanism to go to an existing residence or commercial entity and observe their lighting system, and if it was to code when installed, and say you now have to change this.
But within the permit system that the city has, I have concerns about when new construction takes place, whether it's an apartment building or whether it's a car dealership or, and whether or not the city has an opportunity to really say, let's look at the lighting that you are putting in and make sure that it meets the standards that the city wants to have and that Dark Skies promotes.
I don't know with our current process. I do know that you'll have a lighting and electrical planning like schedule right for the proposed fixtures or installation and its requirements, because that's a core part of permitting is the electrical permitting. And I wish Rich, our director of public works, would speak directly to the specificity of those shrouds and that process. But there absolutely are standards in place that are guiding our community towards the outcomes of Dark Skies. So the existing condition is what we are retrofitting. And we don't own everything. And so ODOT sits on a set of standards and very bright lights for high locations to send a lot of light down. A couple of other examples like that, but absolutely, that's a value that we are trying to implement. It aligns perfectly with our climate action plan and our climate recovery ordinance. It also just aligns with all of our goals around maintaining, especially in our parks and open space, quality of urban habitat. Light is really disruptive too.
Okay, these questions are all over the place, so excuse me, I'm trying to group them together and it's difficult. These two I think are related. Why are we facing a budget shortfall? And related to that, why doesn't increased population density also increase revenue to the city?
Oh, great questions. Why do we have a budget shortfall? The simplest answer to that, in the general fund is where our revenue gap has existed. And as I mentioned at the outset, we have now essentially closed that gap with new funding and also eliminated, or proposed to eliminate city council trust and make the final decision that a recommendation of the budget council. The final decision will be made to reduce some funding for some city positions primarily, and to essentially eliminate some current vacancy positions within the city. I have actually a list of that information here. We'd like to know like a specific example of what that kind of reduction looks like. It's things like eliminating a half-time vacant position within central services. We have cost savings where we're realigning our community and cultural affairs funding. We're realigning funding within programs within public works. We are our energy management program within central services has been reduced. There's been a reduction of position funding within central services and city administration. We were able to successfully put funding underneath most of the rest of these spreadsheets on both pages, but there are city staff positions and city programs that will not be funded going forward. The reason for the budget shortfall primarily is that about 80% of our city's revenue is driven out of property taxes and small contribution in lieu of taxes from UF. 71% is property taxes, 8% or 9% is UF. So 80% of the revenue that the city of Eugene receives is through mechanisms that we have zero as a city. Sometimes people will say things like, if you have a revenue gap, just raise property taxes. My property taxes are really low, just like raise them a little bit, close the gap. That's not an option. That's not a current option for the city or for the city of Eugene or any city in Oregon, or statewide decisions. What that means is that there's a very small window of area where there's flexibility with revenue. And as we are growing as a community over time, we have fewer FTE per 1,000 residents than we've had tracking back at least in 20 years of data as a city. So what that means on the ground for these neighbors is that it's harder as you have more neighbors to get service when we are constantly reducing capacity within our cities, programs and services. It means efficiency in some ways, but it also means reduced capacity to respond to community aspirations, to asks for engagement, to asks for research or study of a particular idea. And it means that we as a city have to be more and more savvy and more collaborative to be able to accomplish all of what we need to accomplish for our community. But that revenue puzzle being relatively inflexible for the city. Property taxes only increase by just a little bit over 3% per year in the way that our system is structured within Oregon. What that means is that whenever you have a circumstance where inflation is above 3%, your city is going to be under an enormous amount of pressure because labor and material costs do not stay fixed over time. And anyone who has run a business or had employees or worked in a business, how they manage that, understands how those things change over time. And what that means for a city that does things like pay for roads and build things and employ people to deliver services and employ people to unlock the door and host community center access and public pools and right, all those things. Those are materials and labor. And those costs have increased and inflation has been much higher than 300% over these past several years. So that is most of the reason why we're facing the budget crunch that we've been facing. And I say this being in touch with mayors across Oregon. All cities in Oregon have had a deficit like ours or greater per capita. When you adjust per capita, the circumstance that the city of Eugene has been in, I think really reflects a lot of the very savvy and cost-conscious administrative work that we tried to do over these past decades as we've been reducing staff. But every city within Oregon was facing a budget gap of some type because this year was when the disconnect between inflation and increases in revenue, kind of major. So you see communities like Salem doing things like passing a new library that they just passed on election day a few weeks ago. That was a brand new levy and a brand new fee for the city of Salem because they were going to close their public library. The city of Springfield is looking at a higher levy strategy, which is a big shift for that city and a big shift in terms of the ask, but it's directly in response to a per capita budget gap and revenue gap that was larger than the city's region. These are not challenges unique to us as a city. Many other communities have been grappling with them, and also many other communities on the I-5 corridor had already implemented a strategy like the one that we had been very actively pursuing, which was the fiber fee. But that is now less of a front burner this conversation and much more likely to not be compatible with that we're solving a strategy that requires more cuts, but also needs that stability for those processes.
Okay, these are somewhat related. Is the city planning on encouraging private property annexation by waiving upfront costs of filing fees and survey costs? And some examples of regulatory strategies to change housing types of incentives. So incentives for building affordable housing, I think is what this is getting at.
There is nothing currently moving at City Council that's a policy or an ordinance or a set of actions that responds directly to this. But I have heard within the community in different community conversations about interest in what strategies might incentivize people to annex into the city of Eugene when they have a plan to develop additional housing or to build more housing on their property or to subdivide a very large lot into a front lot, a smaller lot, And those types of strategies that were included in that note for property tax exemptions, for related to housing production. And those are the types of strategies that other communities have pursued and that I've heard conversation in our community around, but there's nothing currently moving. It could very well, it would really depend on interest and engagement and that strategy is placed within the letter after strategies.
I'm wondering if throwing the Lars issue into that mix would help.
You know, those were the first questions I asked was, you know, so which LARs are already all city parcels, which LARs are already all county parcels, which LARs are a mix of both, what prioritization would make sense. I mean, that was said in the introduction that the county does not want to do this and wants the city to solve the problem.
It won't even show up at the meetings anymore.
That's a tough place to put a city right now, to say essentially, we'd like you to take on this liability as an asset that hasn't been maintained and funded, and now we'd like you to take it on and become the responsible party. That's really challenging. It's not to say it wouldn't be possible. Cities make decisions like that all the time for long-term goals or medium-range goals when the public says, look, we want to do this. We see an opportunity here. But that's a really difficult circumstance when we are already bonding, you know, to the community for our streets. Maybe it's a process over time where we could do it that way, bring one in for these streets bond.
I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I mean, like 3/4 of us are county residents.
Yeah.
And the county, they were very clear in the meeting where the city and the county both showed up.
Yeah.
County has even less money than the city does, and no way to really increase the money they have. But what I'm wondering is whether more of us, I mean, I'm personally a county resident, and I would be much more inclined to say, yeehaw, annex my property. If the city would also take on the streets.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing for homeowners to think.
I absolutely do not think it's an unreasonable thing.
I don't even live on lawn. I just know people who do.
Yeah.
So
I think that the challenge for that is, and again, if I had our public works director with me, he could probably speak to this directly, is how that equation balances. That if you have a whole collection of properties that are at a relatively low intensity of development, and you have street infrastructure that is really deficient, and the goal is to bring it into the city so that it can be brought up to standards, the natural question would be, well, how do you legitimize that cost? How does that work? And who would argue, right? Who would sort of make the case for how this moves forward? If there's no change, usually streets and reinvestments in streets happen with intensification of use, intensification of development. And that's where this piece about new housing being developed or tax exemptions related to new housing being developed, those are the cases where you hear that example coming in. The LAR adds just another layer of complexity, but it does seem like there should be able to be a process to sort of map and make a list and sort of think through how this could work. It sounds like the circumstances as it currently is not working. So the question would be, well, how do we move it into a circumstance that does work for people?
So I'm not sure you can answer this. Update on the Chambers connector. What's happening?
Hi, same question. So, knowing this, I'll share. I did reach out to a couple of our staff and to our city engineer asking for an update just earlier today. And comparing this update to the information that's available on a very specific city webpage that's for road improvements. Not always easily found, but there's a very specific page that is just for that. To say that as a mayor who also is searching for information that we're posting. So this is what was shared from our city engineer as an update on that project. So the project is under a stop work order and is not performing any work besides maintaining / adjusting traffic control and pedestrian accessible routes as necessary. This project will continue to be under a stop work order, all capitalized for specific things, until the contractor can receive authorization from the railroad to perform work within the railroad right of way. They are currently working to execute a contract with railroad flaggers, a key step in moving towards resuming work. Work may resume later in the summer once authorization from the railroad is obtained. Vehicles will remain on the west side of the structure. No turns are permitted onto Roosevelt and Chambers, and Roosevelt Boulevard is closed to through traffic east of Garfield Street to ensure safe pedestrian crossings at Roosevelt Boulevard and Chambers Street while the traffic signal is shut down. A detour has been set up for Roosevelt Boulevard utilizing West Second Avenue. Some modifications will be installed to traffic control on the north side of the bridge to alleviate safety issues regarding the single lane reduction, which is what I've heard the most about. Expect traffic delays during peak hours, alternative routes being highly recommended, pedestrians and people rolling on the wheel devices are encouraged to follow detours through the work zone. And then there's contact information for George Vesper, who is the project manager. His phone number and email information, which we can get to. All of that is something that people would like access to. This information I don't think is yet on the city's road board advisories webpage, but I would expect that it will be there shortly. But it's the stop work order is the current. And though I do not pass through this intersection every day, I'm very aware of how unsettling, inconvenient, concerning, dangerous, confusing, but that circumstance has been people engaging with that location from different directions. And I will follow up and hope that later this summer, and sooner rather than later, but I have no idea what this railroad looks like.
Can I ask just a little follow-up question? If a contract was needed with the railroad in order to do the work, it seems logical that that would have been done in the first place before starting the work.
I would guess that there's a very specific reason why that did not happen, that likely has come to light through the course of the project. I have no idea, but typically when permits are required for something, they happen at the beginning, not later. So I don't know.
The number of people who've almost been killed at that thing there by people not obeying the sign, you know, that if you're in the right lane, you can't go straight. And
Yeah.
and this is terrifying.
As an aside, I will say that one of the through lines thematically, and I'm just noticing this in our community right now. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. Everyone slowing down and obeying traffic direction would be helpful. And I really meant to protect people's life safety. And I just know, I only want to observe this because you're raising this point, that all around Eugene, and I'm trying my best to be present in our community, all around our community. All around our community, there's a lot of people driving way too fast.
Yeah.
And you all experience this probably more than anyone else. The linearity of this street of Highway 99 is not a safe condition for people when folks are not obeying the speed limits and are not understanding that to be a really dangerous condition. And when you encounter unusual circumstances like areas of construction, when you already are moving at a speed that's unsafe for that designed environment, that is a very dangerous circumstance. And all around our community, I see a lot of distracted driving, a lot of people with phone literally in hand. A lot of people not, especially intersections, not looking for pedestrians or bicyclists. And just slowing down a little. We can all do that in our driving habits. I think it will help some, but it's really a challenge when there's something like a highly unusual construction circumstance combining with traffic moving quickly and then not also following the instructions for how to engage the unusual circumstance. It's really challenging.
Would it be possible to get more enforcement? Because my observation is since COVID, people have gone crazy. There hasn't been anybody enforcing any of the
It
rules.
does seem like, I've heard this from several people, that observation that you just shared, that we are more distracted and maybe we're easily distracted by our devices and spent a lot of time with them.
But no enforcement, there's no
But not
no
enough
consequences ever.
So no police, I know that our police motorcyclists are out and ticketing people every day. I don't know what kind of that picture looks like, and that would be, it's actually something I'll ask you Sarah about the next time I talk to them. Where are you taking it? I'll be like, I can't tell you, so I don't want you to tell you. Then we won't be able to give the tickets and affect behavior in a very specific way. But it's, I mean, we are doing enforcement. It's, I just think not. Well, it's just a very common thing. People speeding and distracted right now, which is so dangerous.
Moving off of traffic. Is it possible to have someone from the city liaison with River Road Park and Recreation District about recreational activities? There are a lot of Eugene citizens using the park.
That is a wonderful question. We will have to find out how the answer could be yes. Because our parks, City of Eugene Parks and Open Space does programming and we're also on. How will that work is planned for and the timeline for when that work is planned for. I'm taking it for your purposes, knowing, before the summer, what's happening in the summer would be the most useful. So even looking ahead to the fall planning or that calendar year, that makes a lot of sense to me. I say a lot that our community members don't interpret our community life through the lens of jurisdiction. It's just life that is wonderful here and the things that we love about it. And some of that is schools, some of that is different parks, some of that is related to our utilities, related to our university. Like there's a lot of different layers. Some of it is cities. There's a lot of different layers, but coordination and sharing information, even if it's not coordinating, just being able to share information more easily. It might be as simple as figuring out kind of like what might be our parks districts collectively want to set up on calendars as a checkpoint on programming or a checkpoint on how we can do that. That could be City of Eugene, Langley, and River Road, and Clayton County. People would probably love the information. That kind of coordinating that.
I'm very open to it for me. Also, I didn't ask a question, but thank you so much for your event.
I was thank others.
Thank you so much.
This is somewhat related. How can the city support, coming from somebody that's online, how can the city support community project centers that don't have financial support? Many spaces are underutilized, but require permitting, communication, and enthusiasm that doesn't seem to be available.
What was the direct object in that sentence? Community?
How can the city support community project centers that don't have financial support? Many spaces, and maybe whoever is online, I don't know if we can hear them or not, that asked that question.
I paraphrased, but they wrote, wondering how the city can support community projects and community centers better without financial investment. They don't have a lot of to put into it, but they're willing to do the work. They said, how can the city be accessible for parks and community projects when the enthusiasm is there, but they don't really have the money to put into it? They feel that parks and churches are underutilized and left empty, and they could be filling them with these things that they want to create for the community, but can't quite. I think that's what they're.
So community park spaces and also faith community.
I mean, that's what they said, yeah.
Volunteer.
I don't know if I have an easy answer to that question other than continuing to look for opportunities that are maybe outside of the city. Because I was struck the other week, I don't know how many of you saw the front page of the Register Guard maybe 2 Sundays ago. There was a feature about the food processing and preparation work that's happening at St. Mary's. St. Mary's was the location that there was a specific nonprofit that was called out in the article that was sort of the object of the photojournalism of the day. What I noticed is that I have been at St. Mary's working with another set of folks, the Interfaith Food Hub, preparing food and getting that ready to be available to folks in our community who need it. They also were using the St. Mary's commercial kitchen. to do that work and to prep that work. And that's all happening. I mean, the city might be able to be a sort of support or facilitating touch point, but that's work between our faith communities and our nonprofit communities. And that engagement across those sectors to try to meet a community need sounds a little bit like what might be being asked for. It'll be very hard. There are a couple of programs that the city has. And of course, you know, you always wish that they were more robust, but these are funding programs. And so those are very hard to maintain during times when we're looking at really significant budget cuts to core services. But there are a handful of different grant programs that might be accessible. And there might also be some information that the city would have to sort of point partners in different directions for partnership. Sometimes the city is not the best partner to do something that wants to happen in that way at that level. We could be a great facilitating entity, but it might happen more quickly and more specific to a particular need if it's a partnership through an organization and a nonprofit.
Okay. Is there any plan to regulate the number of short-term rentals so the additional units are actually for renting to people who live here? And I think the question is up here, so it relates to B&Bs.
Good question. So Airbnb, short-term rentals. The city of Eugene has currently a registration process in place and a small fee that is supposed to be attached to that we use to help fund some of our housing programs locally. It's a small fee in comparison to other jurisdictions. I think there's 5% fees. Other jurisdictions, Salem, Portland, have a 10% fee that's attached, and that funding goes to housing programs locally. The work to say like additional units for rentals if people live here. One of the challenges with Airbnbs and long-term rentals in some cases is that the unit that's being rented as an Airbnb is more like a robust hotel room than it is a habitable dwelling unit for long-term rent. So things like a kitchen, a full kitchen being included within the unit is something that's not always the case. Sometimes there's something that's more like under-counter refrigerator and a really great continental breakfast bar and a nice bowl of fruit and a sink, but it's not a kitchen, and wouldn't meet sort of long-term, rental standards in that way. And then I guess lastly, what I would offer is I think the city is going to continue through all of our growth strategies work and near-term and long-term planning work to look at all of the different strategies available to try to make sure that we have more housing available to people who are living here. But there's a lot of laws that tell a city and tell any person that they're not in charge of who someone rents the unit of housing to. And many of those laws are meant to be supportive of local housing. But there are other jurisdictions that do things like limit the number of Airbnbs that a person can own or have within the system locally. There are some jurisdictions in some cities that are saying like, we don't want any of them here. That probably wouldn't work for us as a city to say just like we don't want any of them. But I do think that's short-term rentals will always be an ongoing part of our housing conversation. They're not a very big part of our housing capacity. They're very, very small. And when looking at the data, at least the last studies that Portland State has done, it's such a small number of housing units. It does not drive availability for affordability of housing. It's also a sort of particular type, but they are units of housing. So the question is, how could we incentivize or bring those back into the system? And that will be part of our ongoing city work.
One last question. Totally different. How green are the investments our city funds are in?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. But I will find out and can report back to you all. We have, I have a lot of questions even about the framing of that question. So I will find the answer to that, but also they can be shared because it's a really interesting question.
Can I
trying to tie together, there are a lot of transportation questions.
And I'll just say as an obvious statement, City of Eugene remains very committed to the work that we are doing around our climate recovery ordinance and that should, I just wrote the introduction to the update on our climate action plan, and we, like so many places, have not made as much progress as we need to make in order to meet our targets. That is also why you will continually see me talking about the need to upgrade our built environment to meet contemporary needs and allow people to have access to more affordable, more sociable, in some cases healthier. If you're a little kiddo, you have the option to walk to school safely rather than needing to get a ride to school. But upgrading our transportation systems, because that's a huge part of how it is that we're going to meet our climate goals. We have to have options for people to walk when it's close, to safely cross streets, to bike when it's a little bit farther, or to bike when it's possible, access to transit. Love that you all are thinking very specifically about a route and a vision of the use of that route. And I look forward to talking with our transit partners about that possibility.
Can I just make a couple quick comments on LARs? I've kind of been heavily involved in the work, and I don't want to open up the whole can of words. But first, there are city developments that have happened at the underdevelopers, and that creates a lot of foot traffic in the LARs. So, I would ask that the city look at the next, roads, if it's going to develop that big LARs. We did talk a bit about that as well. And then also trying to think outside of the box. Like normally the city improves the road as it annexes it, but is that necessary? The city actually has annexed roads that are not improved and it's not touching it. So why couldn't it do that? And that would take some of the burden or the pressure off the county. But then maybe you in exchange could require that the county, if they want you to annex roads, LARs, then they've got to agree to maintain them until you can annex them. So that you don't inherit a crumbled, very expensive house.
I very much appreciate your trying to think about a path towards a solution that's workable. I have to say citywide, see a lot of parallels between this LAR conversation at the funding level and the conversation that we're having. We'll be coming to council in a few weeks about the state of our sidewalks. Yeah, so most of the city of Eugene sidewalks are that space that is the responsibility of the property owner that is currently unmaintained, and also in some cases not financially feasible for the property owner to need to maintain. And that's a big question for us because we have a community that, as I just said, we want more people to be able to safely walk to these people being trained. Not just to the neighbors, but to the other things that we need in that day. And that means sidewalk, the pedestrian level, sidewalk connectivity has to be strong. Maybe we will be able to learn something about that process that can help to inform this conversation.
So Kaarin, just for your information, we do have a transportation committee within the neighborhood organization. And a lot of these issues, the LARs, the parking, the bus routes, all of those, I think that they've been talking about. And so if there's a way that we can interact with you, that committee can interact with you, I'm sure it would be helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for your institution and your concern about how it is that we're planning for the future. And also, I really appreciate the opportunity to observe some of the challenges that we face in finding solutions. There's a lot of energy in our world right now that wants just like immediacy of outcome, which when you're working within a real democracy is hard to deliver. It's really challenging to actually do that, but it really helps when we have neighborhoods and community groups that are mobilized and they're trying to find yeses. Like, what if we did it this way? Or could we find it that way? Or how about this? And I think I'll just reiterate, we really need our county partners in this conversation because it's not realistic to just say to the city of Eugene, you take on all of the cost of this and all of the responsibility. We'll have to come up with a better plan and a better strategy for you communicating what that is. And we'll keep working.
Thank you, Kaarin, and everybody else who come and listened and didn't get a chance to ask you had your question asked,
Just a quick one. You wrote a book
I did.
about green urban places.
I wrote the.
Is any of that
Sustainable
happening?
Urban Design Handbook. Yes, yes, indeed.
It's a long answer, but I know you wrote a book and I've looked at some of it.
We just won an award. This is wonderful. This is a project, like a 7 or 8 year passion project for myself. Before becoming an architect and urban designer, I also was a journalist and did other work. And that project I wrote with a colleague who is full-time faculty at the university. I am not. I teach just a tiny amount when I can. It's not tenured faculty, but that book was almost an 8 year passion project to write. And I need to bring a copy to Jane Michaels and to Sonali so that they can have it for reference. There have been some folks who've been asking about that. It's for anyone who really wants to understand like the whole breadth of the built environment in cities and all the levers we have across all scales and all sets of concerned sustainability. That was our hope in writing this book, that we could make that more accessible. And there are many cases where work that's happening in Eugene are good examples, and also some cases where things in Eugene are not good examples. And all sorts of different scales, but cities grow and change continuously over time. So it's a resource to the sharp folks. And it will tell you something about what does your mayor know about cities. The Sustainable Urban Design Handbook. And when you see it, you'll recognize that it has a very colorful striped cover. It's meant to be very friendly and accessible.
And thank you so much.
sorry, maybe it has to be
That's fine.
Yeah.
I would say, yes, maybe for the list, but